the inside man. The target wasn't an inmate this time. It was a correctional officer. Rumors spread that a guard had been helping rival inmates, sneaking in cigarettes, slipping favors, maybe even looking the other way during hits. Whether true or not didn't matter. To the gangs he was marked. The plan was risky. Guards wore vests, carried radios, and never walked alone in the SHU. But gangs inside Pelican Bay had a reputation. If they wanted someone gone, they'd find a way. A torpedo, as they called it, a single inmate chosen to carry out the attack, was selected. He was already serving a life sentence. He had nothing to lose. Days later, as that officer made his rounds on the tier, the torpedo struck. A sharpened piece of metal, hidden inside a legal folder, slashed through the air. The guard went down screaming, blood pouring from his shoulder. Sirens wailed again. Backup swarmed the tier, pepper spray filling the hall like fog. But the gangs had made their point. No one, not even staff, was untouchable. Solitary shadows. The attack sent shockwaves through Pelican Bay. Every officer walked faster, hands closer to their radios. Inmates smirked from behind steel doors, knowing they had just shifted the balance of power. The warden responded with force. Entire cell blocks were stripped bare. Mattresses taken, property seized, even food rations cut down. The SHU, already brutal, became a place of pure survival. Victor, still healing from his yard attack, sat in his cell, ribs wrapped in bandages, scars burning under the cold fluorescent lights. He heard the stories filtering through the walls. Retaliations, beatings, guards dragging men out of cells in the middle of the night. But isolation breeds madness. Some inmates began screaming into the walls, pounding until their fists bled. Others whispered to ghosts only they could hear. And then came the sound. 3 sharp knocks on Victor's wall, followed by silence. It was a signal, but from who? And what did it mean? The pact. Days later, Victor learned the truth. The knocks came from a man 2 cells down, an older lifer tied to one of the prison gangs. The message was simple: join us or stay marked. For weeks, Victor wrestled with the choice. He had already tasted death once. He knew the gangs could end him any time they wanted. Yet joining meant becoming part of the machine, the hits, the drugs, the endless cycle of violence. Finally, survival spoke louder than pride. One night, Victor pressed his knuckles against the wall and knocked back. It was his answer. From that moment, his fate changed. He wasn't just a target anymore. He was property. And to prove his loyalty, he was given his first mission: baptism in blood. The mission was simple, brutal, and non-negotiable. Another inmate had been labeled a snitch. He had spoken to investigators during lockdown. His punishment was death. Victor's job was to make sure it happened. Fear gnawed at him, but there was no escape. In Pelican Bay, refusing an order is a death sentence in itself. The day came. During shower rotations, when inmates are moved one by one in shackles, Victor was placed near the target. In that brief moment, barely seconds, he lunged, striking with a shank hidden in his sleeve. The other man collapsed, screaming as guards scrambled to pull them apart. Blood stained the concrete. Victor was slammed to the ground, wrists wrenched back, pepper spray burning his lungs. He was dragged away to isolation, coughing, eyes wide, realizing what he had just done. He had crossed the line. He was one of them now. And in Pelican Bay, once you're in, there's no way out. The weight of blood. Victor sat in his cell, the echo of his first hit replaying in his mind. The smell of iron, the sound of the man's scream, the look in his eyes, it haunted him. But in Pelican Bay, guilt was a weakness. The gang didn't care how he felt. They only cared that he had proved himself. His baptism was complete. Whispers spread quickly. Some inmates nodded in approval as guards escorted Victor past their cells. Others just stared, knowing he had blood on his hands now. But the guards knew too. His name was added to the watch list. Every movement, every glance, every meal, eyes followed him. The problem? Once you've shed blood for a gang, you're never free again. The only way out is in a body bag. War drums. The prison was boiling. Retaliation stacked on top of each other, stab for stab, punch for punch. In the Chow hall, inmates moved like soldiers, sitting in racial lines, eyes locked across the room. Even the smallest gesture, sharing food, trading soap, was a political act. One morning, a guard overheard a chilling message: "The yard's going hot." That phrase meant only one thing: a major riot was coming. The administration tried to preempt it. Yard times were staggered. Inmates were searched harder. But it didn't matter. In Pelican Bay, when the gangs say it's time, nothing stops it. And when the yard gates opened that Friday, war broke out. The yard erupts. The sun beat down on the concrete as inmates walked in circles, tension thick in the air. Then, like a match hitting gasoline, it exploded. Groups rushed at each other with homemade weapons, sharpened steel, melted plastic blades, even rocks hidden in socks. Fists pounded, blood splattered, bodies collapsed under the weight of boots. Victor, shoved into the chaos, had no choice but to swing. Every punch was survival. Every second was a gamble. Guards fired warning shots, rubber bullets cracking the air. Tear gas canisters exploded, covering the yard in choking smoke. When it cleared, more than a dozen men lay bleeding. Some unconscious. One lifeless. The yard was stained red. And for Victor, it was only the beginning. Punishment. The riot pushed Pelican Bay into emergency mode. Entire yards were shut down. Inmates were stripped, searched, and thrown into the hole. Victor was dragged into solitary again, shackled, chained to the floor during questioning. The guards demanded names. Who started it? Who ordered it? He kept silent. He had no choice. To talk meant death. But silence brought its own punishment. The cell was bare. Lights burned 24/7. Meals were cold, often half-rotten. Days bled into nights, nights into days, until time itself felt like torture. The worst part? The voices. At night, through the vents, he heard screams, prayers, and sometimes laughter that made his skin crawl. And then came the message scratched into his food tray one morning. Stay strong. We see you. The gang hadn't forgotten him. They were still watching. Still owning him. A deadly test. Weeks later, Victor was released back into the SHU block. The tension was still thick. Trust was thin. That night, the knocks came again on his wall. This time the order was worse. The gang wanted him to take out another target. A man rumored to be working with the feds, an informant who had been feeding information about gang activity inside Pelican Bay. This wasn't just another hit. It was a test of loyalty. Victor's chest tightened. He knew if he refused, he'd be marked for death. If he went through with it, he'd sink deeper into a world with no return. The next morning, guards opened the cell doors for showers. Victor's heart pounded as he stepped out, the shank hidden in his waistband. The target walked ahead of him, hands cuffed, unaware. Every step felt like walking into hell. And as Victor's eyes locked on his target, he realized, this was the moment that would seal his fate forever. The second strike. The shower corridor smelled of bleach and sweat. The sound of chains clinking echoed off the cold concrete. Victor's palms were slick, the shank pressing against his skin under the waistband of his jumpsuit. The target shuffled ahead, wrists cuffed behind him, his head shaved and scarred from old fights. To anyone else he looked just like another inmate. But to the gangs he was a traitor, a snitch. As the guards turned their backs for just a split second, Victor lunged. His arm shot forward, blade flashing. The shank pierced flesh. The man stumbled, howling in pain, blood spraying across the wall tiles. The guards reacted instantly. Get down. Get down, they shouted, tackling Victor hard to the ground. His head cracked against the concrete as fists and boots rained down from correctional officers. Dragged away in chains, Victor's ears rang with a single thought. He had just passed the point of no return. Branded. Locked in an isolation cell afterward, Victor's body ached. His knuckles were bruised, ribs sore from the takedown. But worse than the pain was the silence, the hours alone with his thoughts. Days later, a guard slid a tray of food under the slot. On the corner of the tray was a folded piece of paper. Victor's heart skipped. It was a message from the gang. Just 4 words. You're one of us. It wasn't praise. It was a sentence. He had been branded. No matter what happened now, he belonged to the gang. Some men took pride in that. But Victor only felt the weight of chains heavier than steel. He realized survival wasn't freedom, it was slavery to violence. And yet, in Pelican Bay, slavery was better than death. The puppet strings. Weeks passed. Victor became a tool. The gang used him to carry messages, stash contraband, and move weapons between cells. Guards searched constantly, but the system wasn't perfect. The gangs had mastered corruption. Some officers, worn down by fear or tempted by money, smuggled in cell phones, drugs, even weapons. Everything had a price, and Pelican Bay's walls were never as strong as they seemed. Victor saw the truth. The gangs were the real rulers here. The prison administration might control the keys, but the gangs controlled life and death. And Victor, whether he liked it or not, was now a piece on their chessboard. One night, while passing a coded note under his door, he realized something chilling. The gang wasn't just planning inside hits. They were moving power beyond Pelican Bay's walls. And their reach stretched farther than he ever imagined. Ghosts in the system. Rumors crept through the prison that gang orders from Pelican Bay were reaching the streets of Los Angeles, Oakland, and San Diego. Drive-bys, drug deals, extortion. All directed by men locked inside concrete boxes hundreds of miles away. Victor listened in silence as two lifers whispered through vents. The streets answer to us. Even out there, they follow Pelican Bay. It hit him like a blade to the chest. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was empire building. Victor was no longer part of a prison gang. He was part of a criminal government. But the bigger the empire, the bigger the enemies. And one night, the enemy struck back, in the deadliest way possible. Fire in the block. It started with smoke. Thick, black, choking smoke seeping through the vents of Victor's unit. Alarms screamed as guards scrambled to unlock doors and drag men out. Someone had set a fire in the block, a fire meant not to escape but to kill. Chaos erupted. Inmates coughed and choked, some pounding their fists against steel doors begging for air. Guards shouted orders, shoving wet towels under their own masks as they fought through the haze. Victor collapsed to his knees, lungs burning, vision fading. He realized it wasn't just an accident, it was a hit. And if he didn't get out, he'd never breathe again. Smoke and steel. The fire spread fast. Flames licked the edges of doors, smoke swallowed the hall. Victor's throat burned as he coughed, eyes stinging so bad he could barely see. Guards rushed in with fire extinguishers, their shouts echoing in the chaos. One officer pulled Victor out by the chain of his shackles, dragging him across the floor as sparks rained down. But not everyone was saved. When the smoke finally cleared, 2 men were dead, 3 badly burned. And word spread quickly, the fire wasn't random. It was payback. One gang had tried to burn out another, and Victor's block had been the target. That meant only one thing. Retaliation was coming. The list. In the days that followed, the prison felt colder, quieter, like everyone was waiting for the next explosion. Victor overheard whispers through the pipes. There was a list. Names of inmates marked for death. Some for talking to guards. Some for being in the wrong gang. Some simply for standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Victor feared his name was on it. His pulse raced whenever guards passed his cell, half expecting to see a blade waiting at the shower or chow hall. But when a folded note slid under his door, he realized the truth was worse. The list wasn't against him. It was from him. The gang was ordering Victor to carry out the next hit. The weight of choice. Victor's hands shook as he read the order. The target was an older man, one who had once been respected in the yard. But he'd broken rules, they said. He had to go. Victor didn't want this. Each hit chained him deeper, drowning what little humanity he had left. He thought about refusing. He thought about asking for protective custody. But then he remembered what happens to those who say no. He remembered the blood in the yard, the screams in the chow hall, the smell of burning flesh in the block. So he sharpened the weapon. Quietly. Carefully. Knowing his soul was slipping further away. And the night before the order was due, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing he was about to kill again. The silent kill. The opportunity came in the most ordinary place, the shower line. The older man stepped forward, shackled, his back turned. The guard wasn't looking, just for a second. Victor moved fast. The shank slid deep, quick and silent. The man gasped, stumbled forward, blood blooming across his orange jumpsuit. The guard turned too late. By the time he saw it, the man was collapsing, lifeless on the wet concrete. Victor dropped the weapon before he was slammed to the ground, face pressed against the tile. The screams of officers echoed through the corridor as alarms roared again. This wasn't survival anymore. It was execution. And Victor was now a full soldier of Pelican Bay's underworld. The price of power. Days later, Victor sat alone in his cell, wrists raw from shackles, the weight of blood heavier than ever. But this time something was different. The gang rewarded him. Food, cigarettes, protection, they flowed his way. He was no longer just surviving. He was rising. But power in Pelican Bay came with a curse. The higher you climbed, the more dangerous you became. And the more dangerous you became, the more enemies circled your name. That night, as Victor tried to sleep, he heard it, 3 sharp knocks on his wall. The signal again. But this time it wasn't from his allies. It was from the enemy. The knock of death. The 3 knocks on the wall froze Victor. He knew the sound well. It was how allies had once spoken to him. But this rhythm was different. Slower, colder. Then came the message, scratched faintly into the steel vent. We're coming. Victor's stomach twisted. It wasn't from his gang. It was from a rival group. Somehow they knew his name, his loyalty, his every move. Now Victor wasn't just a soldier. He was a marked man. Enemies in the shadows. The next few days felt like walking on glass. Every meal in the Chow hall, every shower rotation, every yard walk, Victor felt eyes drilling into him. One afternoon as he stood in line for Chow, he caught sight of a man staring him down. Tattoos covered his neck, scars crossed his cheek. He mouthed one word. Soon. Victor's chest tightened. He knew what it meant. The gangs weren't going to wait forever. They were plotting to take him out in plain sight. And worse, his own gang hadn't warned him. Betrayal. That night, Victor received another message under his door. He unfolded the tiny scrap of paper, expecting orders. Instead, it was just a name. His own. His heart dropped. The order didn't come from rivals. It came from within. His own gang had put him on the list. He had been useful once, a soldier to carry out bloody orders. But now he was a liability. He knew too much. He had become disposable. The worst fear in Pelican Bay had become his reality. The knives weren't just coming from the enemy. They were coming from his own brothers. The last yard. The next morning the yard gates creaked open. Victor stepped out into the blinding sunlight, chest tight, every sense screaming. He scanned the concrete circle. Groups gathered in their usual corners. But the air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. Then it happened. 3 men broke away from the crowd, moving fast. Victor spun, fists up as the first blade flashed. He ducked, swung wildly, and the yard exploded into chaos. Prisoners cheered, guards shouted, boots pounded the ground. Victor felt a slash rip across his shoulder, hot blood pouring down his arm. He staggered back, trying to survive the storm. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Down in the dust. Victor hit the ground hard, face scraping the concrete. Blades stabbed down around him, fists pounded his ribs, boots cracked against his head. He fought back with every ounce of strength left, but there were too many. The world blurred, red, gray, and black. Just before losing consciousness, he saw something through the haze. Guards charging in, riot shields up, pepper spray fogging the air. The attackers scattered, dragged down by force. Victor was lifted, bleeding, barely alive. As the world went black, only one thought echoed in his mind. In Pelican Bay, no one ever escapes the cycle. Not even me. Waking in chains. Victor opened his eyes to the sharp sting of disinfectant. The white glare of infirmary lights burned his vision. His body felt broken, ribs taped, stitches across his shoulder, head throbbing like a drum. He tried to move, but shackles bit into his wrists and ankles. Even in the prison hospital, no one was free. A guard leaned over, voice low. You got lucky. Another minute and you'd be gone. Lucky. That word didn't fit Pelican Bay. Luck didn't keep men alive here. Only power, fear, and loyalty did. And Victor had just lost all 3. The Whisper Network. After days in recovery, Victor was sent back to the SHU. His body was weak, but his mind raced. He knew he couldn't trust his gang anymore. At night, whispers through the vent system carried messages. Warnings, gossip, secrets. One whisper chilled him to his core. They'll finish the job next time. Victor realized he was living on borrowed time. His own crew had turned him into a walking dead man. The only question was, would he wait for the blade or try to carve his own escape? The offer. Days later, during Chow delivery, a folded piece of paper slid under his door. He opened it with trembling hands. It wasn't from his gang. It was from their enemies. The note read, "Switch sides. We'll keep you breathing." Victor sat frozen. Joining the rivals was unthinkable. It was betrayal, a move that would put him at war with his own past. But staying loyal meant certain death. For the first time, Victor faced a choice worse than violence itself: loyalty or survival. The setup. The next yard day came fast. The sun burned bright over the concrete pit, but the atmosphere was ice cold. Victor walked slow, scars still raw. He saw men nodding to each other, glancing his way. His pulse hammered. This was it. Suddenly, a commotion erupted. 2 inmates on opposite sides charged at each other, fists flying. Guards rushed toward the fight, radios crackling. And in that chaos, Victor felt it, the shove. Someone was pushing him toward another attacker, knife flashing in the sun. It wasn't a random fight. It was a setup. The breaking point. Victor barely dodged the blade, the tip slicing his jumpsuit sleeve. He swung back hard, catching the attacker in the jaw. Blood sprayed. The yard exploded again. Men brawling, guards firing rubber bullets, tear gas filling the air. Victor hit the ground, coughing, chest heaving, body battered. As officers dragged him back inside, his mind broke through the haze with one truth. There was no way out. No side to trust. No safety anywhere. In Pelican Bay he wasn't a survivor anymore. He was just the next dead man walking. Isolation within isolation. After the setup in the yard, Victor was thrown into deep isolation. His cell was stripped bare. No books, no radio, nothing but concrete, steel and silence. 4 days he sat alone replaying every betrayal, every order, every drop of blood spilled by his hands. The voices in the vents were gone now. Even his enemies had gone quiet. But the silence was worse than the noise. Because silence in Pelican Bay meant one thing. Someone was planning. And Victor knew, it was either his execution, or his chance. The desperate plan. In the dead of night, Victor made a choice. He couldn't survive as a soldier anymore. He couldn't play both sides. The gangs had already decided his fate. So, for the first time he thought about the unthinkable. Protective custody. It was a mark of shame in prison. A choice that labeled men as snitches, cowards or traitors. But it was the only card he had left. One morning as guards delivered Chow, Victor pressed his hands against the slot and whispered, "I need to talk." The guard's eyes narrowed. About what? Victor swallowed hard. About living. The price of talking. The meeting came in a cold, windowless room. 2 investigators sat across from Victor, tape recorder humming, eyes sharp as knives. They didn't offer kindness. They offered survival for a price. Names? Orders? Details. You talk, you breathe. Victor stared at the table, sweat dripping. To speak meant betraying the code of silence, the only rule Pelican Bay lived by. But to stay quiet meant dying in the next ambush. Finally his voice cracked. He began to speak. Slowly. Carefully. Giving pieces of the puzzle. With every word he felt the weight of chains growing heavier, not from steel but from guilt. The ghost of the yard. Weeks later Victor was moved. Not to freedom, not to safety, but to a new kind of cage, protective custody. He was alive but he was a ghost. No allies. No enemies. No one to look at him except guards who knew he had flipped. Word spread fast. Through whispers, through letters, through networks on the street. Victor's name was poison now. To the gangs he wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a snitch. And in Pelican Bay, a snitch's life is just a longer way of dying. The cycle never ends. Victor survived, but at a cost no one would envy. The gangs moved on, new soldiers rising to replace him, new wars erupting in the Chow halls and yards. The same cycle of power, betrayal and blood spun on. For Pelican Bay, Victor was just another chapter in a book written in violence. A story of loyalty shattered, of survival twisted, of men broken by a system designed to crush them. The truth is simple. Pelican Bay isn't just a prison. It's a machine. A machine that feeds on men, grinds them into soldiers, ghosts or corpses, and never stops. And Victor? He learned the hardest lesson of all. In Pelican Bay there are no winners. Only survivors who never truly survive. This was the story of Pelican Bay Supermax. True crime stories of gangs, violence and survival. Behind the walls of America's most feared prison, men fight not just for power, but for breath, for sanity, for life itself. The names may change. The faces may fade. But the cycle? It never ends. Backhand index pointing right. If you want more stories from the darkest corners of the prison system, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. Because the next story is even more shocking. Pelican Bay Supermax. True crime stories of gangs, violence and survival. Blood on the concrete. The cell block was silent, until the scream cut through the air. A man collapsed, clutching his side, blood spilling across the concrete floor of Pelican Bay's security housing unit, better known as the SHU. He had been ambushed in the yard, stabbed with a weapon no one even saw coming. Guards rushed in, sirens blared, and prisoners pressed their faces against the bars, cheering or whispering as chaos spread. One man stood apart, his eyes cold, tattooed arms crossed, as if he already knew this attack was coming. But here's the question, how could a hit this precise, this brutal be carried out in a prison designed to be escape-proof, contact-proof, and locked down 23 hours a day? Who gave the order? And why did no one see it coming? This is the world of Pelican Bay Supermax, where gangs run shadow governments, violence is currency, and survival is never guaranteed. The prison within the prison. Pelican Bay wasn't built like an ordinary prison. Opened in 1989 on the remote edge of California's north coast, it was designed to hold the state's most dangerous inmates, the gang leaders, the lifers, the ones too violent for other prisons. Here, the SHU is the heart of fear. Imagine being locked in a concrete box the size of a bathroom with no windows, no sunlight, and only 1 hour a day in a tiny yard called the Dog Run. That's Pelican Bay. But while the prison was designed to break the power of gangs, something else happened. Instead of killing gang influence, it concentrated it. Leaders from the Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, Nuestra Familia, and Black Guerrilla Family were now placed in the same fortress. Through coded letters, secret hand signs, and even messages hidden in legal papers, they controlled the yards, the drugs, the money, and even life and death, across California's prison system. For the young or weak inmates, survival meant one of two choices: join a gang or become prey. And when one man refused to play by the rules, it triggered the bloodshed that shook the SHU. The new arrival. In 2002, a young inmate named Victor arrived at Pelican Bay. He wasn't a lifer. He wasn't even a hardcore gang member, just a small-time hustler from Los Angeles who thought he could survive on his own. The first days seemed calm. He kept to himself, read books, and avoided eye contact. But in a place like Pelican Bay, silence can be dangerous. Other inmates watched him. They noticed he wasn't showing respect, wasn't paying taxes on commissary items, and wasn't following unwritten rules. One morning, Victor found a note slipped under his cell door. It was short and sharp. Program or be dealt with. Victor crumpled the paper, tossed it in the toilet, and flushed it. A choice that might have sealed his fate. Because in Pelican Bay, disrespect isn't forgiven. It's answered with steel. The green light. A week later, the whispers began. Guards overheard inmates saying there was a green light on Victor, a prison term for a death order. Victor felt it too. Meals came with stares, showers with silence. Even the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves knew something was about to happen. But survival instincts kicked in. He started working out harder, sharpening his focus, trying to watch every angle. He barely slept, knowing at any second someone could come for him. And then it happened. During his 1 hour in the yard, 3 men surrounded him. One distracted him, while another pulled a weapon crafted from melted plastic sharpened to a deadly point. The first strike landed deep. The second came fast. Blood poured, and Victor stumbled, trying to defend himself with his bare hands. The guards didn't see it until it was too late. Chaos in the yard. The siren blared. Correctional officers sprinted in, shields raised, pepper spray in hand. Inmates dropped to the ground, some face first, others still trying to land blows before the guards reached them. Victor was dragged away, barely alive, as his attackers were slammed to the floor, cuffed, and hauled off to isolation. But here's the twist. Everyone in that yard knew the attackers weren't acting alone. They were soldiers carrying out the command of someone else, someone higher up. Inside Pelican Bay, violence doesn't happen randomly. It's planned, sanctioned, and ordered from the top. And this attack was only the beginning of a war that would shake the prison to its core. Retaliation. 2 weeks later, the prison was tense. Gangs prepared for payback. Commissary lines became scouting grounds. Exercise yards became hunting zones. Then it exploded. In the Chow hall, a fight broke out between rival groups. Trays flew, fists swung, and hidden blades flashed in the dim light. Guards rushed in, but it was too late. The hall became a battlefield. By the time order was restored, 3 men were bleeding, 1 barely clinging to life. And the message was clear. In Pelican Bay, survival is never about luck. It's about loyalty, power, and knowing that at any moment, you could be next. Lockdown. After the Chow Hall riot, Pelican Bay slammed into full lockdown. Doors clanged shut, lights flickered, and every inmate was confined to their cells. The air smelled like bleach, mixed with the faint sting of pepper spray still lingering from the fight. Guards patrolled with riot shields, batons ready, and tear gas launchers strapped across their chests. Every movement was watched. Every word was noted. But the silence didn't mean peace. Behind those concrete doors, messages still moved. Through pipes, through tiny knocks on walls, through coded kites smuggled past guards, gang leaders were still communicating. The green light had sparked a fire, and now everyone was waiting to see who would strike next. One night, a guard making rounds paused when he noticed faint whispers in Spanish echoing through the vent system. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew one thing: a new order had just been given. And by the next morning, the target had a name.